You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have such a full show for you this week, it's popping its seams. The conversation this week is about surrogacy. I mean, by now, pretty much everybody knows that reproductive technologies can be wondrous and also terrifyingly dangerous. Whether we're talking about designer gene babies or the multiple anguishing trials of IVF that some women endure, or the anonymous egg donor who vanishes, or the woman who carries the embryo to term and then has to give up the child that she's born, you know, none of these roles were created by women, and even those who defend the practice know that they are walking on a minefield of controversy. If the selling of a kidney because of poverty is illegal nonetheless, then why is there a flourishing global industry that talks about the product child as a tradable commodity and defends the practice as fair trade surrogacy? Well, we're going to explore some of that today with my guest, the biologist and women's rights activist and ethicist who has studied this subject for decades. But before we get into that, or the surrealism corner, or fighting words, we have to go inside the headlines. We have so much news this week that I'm going to have to move this along in a sort of almost bulleted fashion. Starting on a high note, for the first time in history of the nation, women hold a majority in a state legislature, both houses of the Nevada legislature, and also of the Colorado House, the lower legislature. Patricia Ann Spearman, Democrat and Nevada senator, first elected in 2012, says it's time to do away with the patriarchy that holds people down. Spearman is accustomed to barrier breaking. She's 64, a lesbian woman, an African-American woman, a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army, and an ordained minister. Kristen Rowe Finkbeiner, executive director and CEO of the NGO Moms Rising and previously a guest on this program, testified before Congress in a hearing on the Paycheck Fairness Act. She pointed out, quote, "In the U.S., dads get wage boosts and moms get pay cuts. Being a mom is now an even greater predictor of hiring and wage discrimination than being a woman. Our country, which claims to adore motherhood, pays women with children just 71 cents to every dollar it pays dads. It's even worse for mothers of color. Latina mothers are paid just 46 cents on the dollar, Native mothers just 49 cents, Black mothers just 54 cents. White non-Hispanic mothers 69 cents, and Asian Pacific Islander mothers just 85 cents for every dollar paid to white non-Hispanic fathers. So much for applehood and mother pie. 3 Yale students have filed a class action lawsuit against the university, arguing that the school fosters an environment where alcohol-fueled gatherings at off-campus fraternity houses enable harassment and dictate the undergraduate social context, what we would call out here in the great world rape culture. The plaintiffs, Anna McNeil, Eliana Singer, and Rye Walker, claim fraternities elevate men to social gatekeepers and relegate women to sexual objectification. Moreover, fraternities have alumni and professional connections, often resulting in coveted job offers and economic opportunities. The lawsuit claims that Yale lags behind Harvard, which in 2016 announced it would discourage students from joining single-sex social clubs by barring them from leadership positions on campus and from receiving endorsements for prestigious scholarships like the Rhodes Scholarship. Internationally, a lot is afoot. A not-so-quiet revolution is taking place among Haredi Orthodox women in Israel. We've touched on this before, but it's really getting out of hand in a good way. Beit Shemesh, a city west of Jerusalem, has its first woman mayor in Aliza Bloch, a 51-year-old former high school principal backed by both center and right-center parties, defeating a two-term incumbent. In recent years, that city has been torn between the secular and so-called modern Orthodox populations on one side versus the strict conservative Orthodox Haredi, and they've been fighting over restrictions on women's dress and gender-segregated seating on public buses, for example. Bloch said of her election, Beit Shemesh decided to tear down its dividers. Interestingly, she used the term mechitza, which are the dividers used to separate men and women in the synagogue. Meanwhile, Adina Bar Shalom, daughter of a major Haredi political party's founder, is running for parliament on a social justice platform and is expected to join a centrist ticket, not her daddy's. In Haifa, Israel's third-largest city, a leading Haredi party actually endorsed a non-religious woman, Einat Kalish Rotem, 48. She subsequently defeated a longtime incumbent to become the first woman mayor there. And Michal Zernowitzki, 38, who grew up in Elad, another ultra-Orthodox and historically right-wing city, is running for parliament on the Labour Party ticket while publicly blasting Haredi political parties. She defines herself as part of the new Haredim, for women's rights, gay rights, and a broader Israeli society. She claims she's used to being different. She was an Orthodox woman in the tech industry. Mazel tov, girls! Japan's finance minister has apologized publicly for saying that elderly people were to blame for the country's rising Social Security costs. Instead of blaming older folks, he decided to blame women. Quote, "Some people blame the elderly," he said, "but that's wrong. It's more problematic that women do not have enough babies." Close quote. The minister, Taro Aso, 78, is among a group of conservative legislators who often blame women with no children for the country's demographic challenges. A large private Facebook group of French male journalists has for years been behind waves of online insults and harassment aimed at female, mostly young, colleagues. After years of rumors, it has now been confirmed that the group, calling itself League of LOL, is the culprit. This is a moment of general reckoning with sexism in the French news media, which is still almost totally male-dominated. Some of the men behind the group issued apologies, and several have been suspended from their jobs. HuffPost France fired 3 men who were part of an all-boys discussion channel called Radio Beer Soccer, where sexist, racist, and homophobic comments were commonplace. Others among the suspended journalists included those from Libération. Women journalists are now finally speaking out, with stories of abuse ranging from finding fake pornographic photo montages of themselves circulated on Twitter, to prank phone calls, to insulting comments on spreading rumors about the women journalists having slept with their bosses, to floods of hate mail and out-and-out reputation destruction. Many of these women simply left their chosen career of journalism and felt they had been driven out. Although some claim that the French version of Me Too has not gained much ground, the French police have received drastically more reports of sexual crimes in the past year because victims have grown more willing to come forward. I'd call that a result. More on the endangered female journalist front, this time from the Philippines. The wonderful journalist, former CNN head of bureau in the Philippines, Maria Ressa, co-founder of the online news site Rappler and critic of President Rodrigo Duterte, was arrested in a politically staged libel case, as she warned she would be when she was a guest on this program in episode 248 last May. She was released on bail only last week, but still has to face heavy charges. We'll stay on this story because she is a jewel among women and journalists. A sixth woman has now joined those alleging that former President of Costa Rica and Nobel Peace Prize winner Oscar Arias of sexual misbehavior, ranging from unwanted advances to outright assault. Arias told reporters that he has always answered questions during 50 years in public life, but this time he has decided not to because his lawyer has requested his silence. I'll bet. The first criminal complaint was by a female peace activist who said he had groped, kissed, and penetrated her with his fingers against her will. A former Miss Costa Rica lodged the second complaint. Karina Black, an American, the director of the International Center at the University of Colorado in Reno, and the latest woman to come forward, said, quote, "We almost always think it is our fault, that we somehow encourage these kinds of situations. Unless we come out and say something to the contrary, this will continue to happen to other women." Close quote. Women are now truth-telling not only for themselves, which is crucial, but for other women, and that is revolutionary. It's time for a break, but the program is young, and off there warming up is Fighting Words and certainly the conversation about surrogacy, which is pretty surreal in itself when you think about it, although nothing is as surreal as what we're going to do when we come back. We're going to go into the Surrealism Corner. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back, and welcome into the Surrealism Corner. El Paso, Texas has been in the news lately, with Trump and Beto O'Rourke, who's from there, giving dramatically different views of the place in a Jewel of Boys rallies last week. That was a little weird, but not as much as this first item, nor as yucky, nor as funny. As a way to involve the public in the El Paso Zoo's activities, members of the staff asked the community to submit names of their exes, ex-lovers, partners, spouses, 4 weeks before Valentine's Day. So on the day itself, last week, the staff decorated the meerkat cage with the submitted names, and then, in what they called a "Quit Bugging Me" event, the staff fed cockroaches named after all the exes to the meerkats as treats. Meerkats, I hope you know, are those hilarious little animals that sit on their haunches with excellent posture and swiveling heads held very high, eyes wide open to spy any dangers on the landscape. When they pop up out of their holes, peer around anxiously and pop down again, and then repeat that again and again. It's very difficult not to laugh until your ribs ache. I admit that I would probably find it less funny if, when they did their popping up and down, they had a cockroach dangling from their mouths, but still, it's one way to spend Valentine's Day, and it does feel smugly and yet harmlessly vengeful toward your ex. Harmlessly, scream the cockroach ghosts. I can hear them now. Speaking of cockroaches, it's been just a few months since Les Moonves was fired by CBS after multiple women accused him of sexual misconduct. Well, now, already, the former entertainment power honcho has popped right back up again, but without the charm of a meerkat. He's reconstituted himself as head of a new independent company that will focus on entertainment services. He has a 10th-floor suite on LA's Sunset Boulevard in one of the tallest buildings in West Hollywood, and his office is surrounded with windows. He is sheathed in glass. Guess who's paying for that? CBS. Not willingly, because the network is still locked in legal combat over $120 million in severance that Moonves claims they owe him, while CBS argues that he was fired for cause. Willful and material misfeasance, violation of company policies, and breach of his contract. However, his exit agreement says that CBS has to pay for his, quote, office services, unquote, for no less than a year, even if he was fired for cause. You know, the resurrection, the count to 5 and then let's go resurrection, of these guys, these slimy sexual offenders, echoes the offense itself. It feels like the offense is just continuing in another way. Their brazen sense of entitlement, Moonves, Louis C.K., Charlie Rose, any of the others trying to make their comebacks before the ink has even dried on their publicist written for them hypocritical apologies. God forbid they should take 15 minutes to look seriously at what they've done, to seriously examine why, and to seriously examine who they themselves are. Now here's a nice bitlet. The European Space Agency will launch a rover to Mars at the next window, which is in 2020, with the landing planned for 2021. The rover's job, in part, will be to drill down 6.5 feet below Mars' surface to where evidence of past or present life may perhaps exist. That's why the European Space Agency named this life-seeking robot after a woman scientist who played a major role in understanding life on Earth. Rosalind Franklin was the real discoverer of the structure of DNA. In the early 1950s, her work revealed DNA's famous double helix structure. 3 men, James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins, took credit. But Franklin, an X-ray crystallographer, had been telling them about the double helix structure for some time, and they pooh-poohed the idea as too fantastic. Franklin died at age 37, tragically, from ovarian cancer, making her supposedly ineligible for all the prizes, including the Nobel received by the men. Yet the stipulation against posthumous awarding of the Nobel, that stipulation didn't come into practice until 1974. Well, now Crick and Wilkins are dead, and Watson, in his 90s, has recently been stripped of his many awards because of his racist remarks and eugenicist position. But Franklin, or at least her namesake, will still be exploring, this time for decades and decades, this time on Mars. She'd like that. We seem to be largely about science today. Perhaps that's because therein lies true surrealism and wonder, as opposed, to the fake news surrealism of Trump's comments or Kardashian fashions. Anyway, here's the story. The axolotl, or the Mexican walking fish, looks like a, quote, cheerful tube sock with 4 legs, a crown of feathery gills, and a long tapered tail fin, close quote. That's according to one of New York Times staff science writers, Steph Yin, who also described it wonderfully as having a face resembling the slightly smiling emoji face, and coming in colors ranging from pale pink through gold to gray or black. It does not undergo the usual metamorphosis of amphibians. Instead, it reaches sexual maturity and spends its whole life as a giant tadpole baby. In the wild, axolotls are threatened by habitat degradation and now can be found only in the canals of Lake Xochimilco, south of Mexico City. But the creatures are thriving in labs around the world, and they might be paving the way for human regenerative medicine. Quite a few animals can perform some degree of regeneration, but these so-called walking fish are extremists. So long as you do not cut off their heads, which would be gross, they can grow back just about any body part, including up to half their brain. Wow. Researchers at the University of Kentucky are working to understand such self-healing powers, and they have discovered that the axolotl genome is 10 times as large as the human. Now, that would be a great leap forward for medicine, benefiting humans in inconceivable ways, including possibly having faces that resemble an emoji that is slightly smiling. I could use a fresh half a brain, couldn't you? And in closing, our word this week from another language that is untranslatable to a single word in English, but rather requires a whole sentence to approximate it. Today, that word is from Spanish, and it's expressive and then some. Duende, D-U-E-N-D-E, duende, means an intensified sense of profound emotion felt in reaction to a deeply moving piece of art. As in, sitting quietly in the huge gallery at the Museum of Modern Art, while surrounded by the wall-size paintings of Monet's water lilies, fills me with duende. You might say that duende is a state of aesthetic joy. Nicely surreal. It's time for another short pause now and a bit of, real-life surrealism. I've been thinking, if self-determination over one's own body is the linchpin of feminism, a woman's right to conceive or not, a woman's right to choose a sexual partner or not, and which sexual partner, if all of that hinges on the woman's right to control her own body, then what's wrong with a woman selling parts of that body or selling her womb? Well, for one thing, we know it's not great to have to sell your body for prostitution, and we know she never really does that voluntarily, but out of need, in fact, grave need. So how is surrogacy different, or is it? Well, all that's coming right up, so don't go away. We'll work at untangling the knot. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back for the conversation. My guest today is Dr. Renate Klein. She's an Australian academic, a writer, a publisher, and a feminist health activist. She was born in Switzerland and was awarded a Master of Science degree in biology from the University of Zurich, and later a Bachelor of Arts with honors from the University of California and a doctorate in philosophy from the University of London. She has conducted research into new and old reproductive technologies, and she has authored or co-authored, edited or co-edited 14 books, many of which explore reproductive technologies and the medicalization of women. She is the recipient of the Australian Human Rights Award for Literature and Other Writing. And today she's going to talk with us about the quite controversial subject of surrogacy. Her newest book is Surrogacy, a Human Rights Violation. And whether you're pro or anti-surrogacy, you will not come away from this conversation without thinking once, thinking twice, thinking quite a few times, and then rethinking again. Renate Klein. Renate, welcome.
Thank you very much, Robin, for inviting me. I'm very honored.
Oh, my dear. Well, your family now. Full disclosure, listeners, Renate is one of the two founders, along with Susan Hawthorne, of Spinifex Press, and I am proud to be a Spinifex author with my latest book of poems, Dark Matter. But she's here today as a very distinguished author herself. You've done 14 books, something like that? 13, 14 books, Renate?
Yes, I have. That's right. Not all of them I have. Also, some of them are edited and co-edited. And I've been working on reproductive technologies for a very long time. And in fact, the first ever international book critical of reproductive technologies came out in 1984 and was called Test Tube Women, What Future for Motherhood. And I edited that with Rita Arditi, who has sadly gone away.
Yes,
and
was wonderful.
Shelley Minden. And I got into it because I'm a biologist by training, and people said to me, what do you think about all these new reproductive technologies like test tube babies? And I said, I don't really know very much about that because, Louis Brown, the ever first test tube baby, was born in 1978.
Yeah.
And so it was really, nobody had an idea. We didn't know what feminists were thinking about it. So we started this call for papers. And by the end, when we had all these contributions, the three of us were horrified already then. This was early 80s. And of course, surrogacy was talked about then. And in fact, then, in 1984, we founded our international network, FINRAGE, a feminist international network.
I remember.
Of resistance. Yeah, to reproductive and genetic engineering, still going, not as strong as then, but still going. And in 1988, actually, an American, a New York attorney, Noel Keane, tried to open a surrogacy agency in Frankfurt. And FINRAGE and lots of other women, we managed to stop it. And so Germany banned surrogacy, still banned. France banned surrogacy, still banned. So, it was
You've
fantastic.
been at it.
And then
you've been at it for quite a while. You are. I think you are the resident feminist go-to person on the subject of not only surrogacy but so many reproductive issues. Because you come at it both with a biologist's eye, and a scientist's eye, and a feminist eye. And the latest jewel, the latest gem that you've given us is the book, A Human Rights Violation, Surrogacy, A Human Rights Violation, and really goes into what is really happening in surrogacy today and why, in fact, it is not just the terrible thing we thought it was, but worse. I remember when, first hearing that surrogacy was becoming a thing and sort of popular, being outraged at it because at that point it was very much a so-called global north, first world luxury wish
phenomenon. Yeah.
And then meanwhile there were poor women and women of color in the global south who were being used as sort of living wombs because they had nothing, no better way to survive than by renting out their bodies. I mean, it's a form of birth being prostituted.
Absolutely.
But in this book, you've taken it even farther. I used to think, well, if the women chose this and if they were well remunerated and they were well medically taken care of, then it was providing children to childless people who desperately wanted them, and the women themselves didn't mind. I mean, I didn't have much of a consciousness about it. Well, you shot that to hell.
Well, I'm pleased I did, actually.
Yeah, you really did.
Yes.
So go into it for our listeners, Renate, because first of all, explain surrogacy for the few people who might not have heard of it or be unsure what it means.
Yep. Okay, so surrogacy is the making of an embryo, and an embryo is being made from sperm that comes out rather easily from a man, and an egg, and the egg doesn't come easily out of somebody, but it is usually an egg donor, and that's a dangerous procedure to get the eggs ripened in her body and then get them out, and they're usually young women. So this embryo gets then implanted into a so-called surrogate mother. And this so-called surrogate mother, and that's of course a total misnomer because she's not surrogate at all, she's really real, she then actually gestates this baby for 9 months in her body. In other words, she makes this baby from her body. And that's one of the things that the people who are in favor of surrogacy always try to put down. They say, oh, she's just her womb. We put the embryo in, and then after 9 months, it's the baby, and we take it out, and we give it to the people who have commissioned this baby, who've actually paid for making the embryo and then paid for the baby.
The idea of her as a vessel only is actually a medieval. It's medieval because literally the church in the Middle Ages propagated the idea that inside each drop of sperm was a homunculus, a little tiny person.
Yeah, that's right.
And the womb was merely this completely sort of whatever, who cared? But it was the home where the little homunculus could grow and flourish. And we're returning to the Middle Ages here.
Well, probably even earlier, because even the Greeks said it already, and it was already then. It was like the sperm was what made the baby, and the woman was only the incubator. These people who commission this baby, I call them baby buyers sometimes, or commissioning parents, but nicer people call them intended parents. Mostly, it's the sperm donor is one of the commissioning couple, like the man, whether it's a gay couple or a heterosexual couple. In some states, for instance, in America, in Oregon, and that they want to do the same, I think in New York as well, there's already a pre-parentage arrangement in which the sperm donor is called the father, and very often there is no mother designated because the anonymous, the egg donor is often anonymous. The egg donor who is anonymous keeps being forgotten because very often this is the result of an infertile woman going through endless IVF programs. Doesn't work. She has miscarriages. It's very painful if you want a baby and you can't give one. But instead now the IVF programs say, oh, you could do surrogacy because there's this woman who's very happy to carry your baby, except it's not really her baby. It's made for men because, as I said, the sperm donor is then called the father, and it's basically a motherless baby. There are a few states in the United States that allow commercial surrogacy, that they allow that to happen.
When you say commercial surrogacy, you are differentiating between a situation like you've just described, for example, where they pay to have this done, and those cases you hear about once in a while where the inability is in the woman, and so her sister will say, well, I'll carry the baby for, in other words, where there is a relationship between the women who arrange it. And I guess that would be more voluntary.
No. Well, that's right. Well, yes, you can ask yourself that if it really is voluntary. But yes, commercial surrogacy is when it's a capitalist commercial transaction, incredible power differences. The so-called surrogate mother is very often of a lower socioeconomic status, which often includes lower education. And the baby buyers, they can afford it. I believe there's a strong lobby at the moment in New York of gay men lobbying the government to legalize commercial surrogacy, because until now, New York State only has so-called altruistic surrogacy. People in favor of surrogacy say, oh, the contract can be really well thought out and nothing can go wrong.
Well, also, there have been cases where women have changed their mind, while carrying,
yes.
And then tried to get out of the contract or tried to fight the contract or fled.
And then that's when the inequality of power comes really into it, because then this stuff goes to a court. That's when the commissioning parents, they have the money, the surrogate and her family, who are usually poorer, why would they have the money to defend it? And so, unfortunately, there's very few cases where the women were able to actually keep the baby. Mostly they lose.
Yeah.
And then they're heartbroken because, and people in favor of surrogacy says, but we want women's reproductive autonomy. We say women have choice. She signed this contract. She knew what she was in for. And to them, I say, no woman who starts a pregnancy ever knows, A, how the pregnancy will go, and B, what feelings she develops to this child that she, as I said earlier, grows in her own body.
Yes.
It's not just that the embryo sits there in her womb and she goes, la, 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 my embryo grows in my womb. It's got nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with her.
Well,
and so,
saying that she really enjoys being bought and sold is like the argument that some men make for, and in fact the sex industry makes for prostitution. The institution of prostitution, or sexual exploitation in general. Well, the women like it. They call themselves sex workers. It's a groovy job. No 8-year-old little girl wakes up and says in the morning and says, "Gee, I want to be a hooker when I grow up." This is not a choice.
Yeah.
This is not a choice.
No. And I do call surrogacy reproductive prostitution in my book. And of course, I'm not alone on this. And maybe, we should really say that, there's lots of other, mostly women, but also some good men who really oppose surrogacy.
Right.
And we have now got fantastic groups. Finrage has opposed it since, as I said earlier, since the 80s. But the newest group, which was founded in 2015, is called Stop Surrogacy Now, and I was a sort of a founding member, but the person behind it to whom we owe so much is a woman called Jennifer Lal, and she's the director of the Center for Bioethics and Culture, and she's just a powerhouse. In France, there's an organization called ICASM, which is the International Coalition for the Abolition of Surrogate Motherhood. Then there's a French...
For the abolition of motherhood.
The abolition of surrogates.
Okay. I thought, wow, I just went out the window.
No, we don't really. In fact, we actually quite like to keep motherhood, because of course far away there's the artificial womb, and then we wouldn't need any mothers.
Well, I want to get into that. What do we tell? Let me play devil's advocate here. What as we campaign to take this away from couples that either are heterosexual and infertile for one or the other partner, or gay men. What do we tell the sincere people who have been through agonizing fertility implants and for years and still can't conceive, or he's gone through treatments and they still can't and they really, sure they could adopt, but what if they really, really plaintively want a child of their own? Is there something that we can offer them in the balance that doesn't involve human slavery?
Well, no, unfortunately, what we can offer them is to say, we understand your pain, we understand infertility. I actually worked on that for a very long time with women who went through IVF. So I know what the pain of involuntary childlessness is. However, it is not a right, and it is certainly not a right when two other women are in great harm and can and are actually exploited. Yes. Even if they say, yes, I signed this contract voluntarily. Right, it is not on that you procure yourself a child for yourself by buying or by renting a woman's uterus. And during the pregnancy, the baby buyers, they absolutely control what the woman eats, what she is allowed to drink, is she allowed to have sex.
In India and in Nepal, they used to, I think until fairly recently, they have these sort of pseudo-luxury homes, large mills, really, like puppy mills, where poor women go, village women go, and they are given specific diet. They are, in one extent, they're pampered in a way they've never been in their whole lives, because they get 3 meals a day. They're not allowed to do anything except watch television, which is its own kind of hell, I think, but maybe they don't. But they're never allowed to have, a glass of wine or anything that is. It's a completely proscribed situation where they are literally treated like bearers. Some situations similar to Handmaid's Tale, but
oh yes, absolutely.
But you mentioned something about an artificial womb. Would that address the situation? It seems a little seems spooky to me.
No, of course it wouldn't. But like the artificial womb again has been under investigation for decades. And they're still working on it. And of course, they're not saying it is, to replace women, but I mean, really, in a way that it would be that. So
they'll put us in zoos after that.
But just go back to what you said in India. I mean, it's very good. India, Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia, they have all closed their doors to international surrogacy. Yeah. Yes, in India, the bill is still has to go through one part of Parliament, but it's it's a bit of a controversial bill because it still allows the so-called altruistic surrogacy. And I just want to say to that, I'm against all forms of surrogacy, because in Australia we do not have commercial surrogacy and we will not have it. But altruistic surrogacy has its own problems. I actually think that altruistic surrogacy is really painful, because in the end it divides family, it leaves people really bitter and really, really saying horrible things about one another. And the poor child. Now, we haven't said anything about the child, because the child has got rights. And the child was never asked if he'd want to be, as I say, a takeaway baby. Like, you take it out like puppies, dogs, they are left 6 months with their 6 weeks with their mothers before they're taken away. Yeah. Well, human babies, they're taken away from their mother, who has got milk coming into her breasts, who is sore, who had a maybe very, very difficult birth, and of course very often it's a cesarean, and it's just taken away. Government Cuomo has a bill that he's introducing under the budget bill, and he will vote, or they will vote on it before the 1st of April. So time is of the essence. Yeah. And he needs to be told that introducing commercial surrogacy into New York State would make New York a pariah. And it really contravenes the UN Convention on the Right of the Child. It contravenes CEDAW. It contravenes so many of the other UN regulations. I'll list them all in my book. It's really something that should not happen. And
thank you, my dear, for all the work that you've done for so long on this and on so many other feminist subjects, and for the book, which is really stunning and fascinating, A Human Rights Surrogacy, A Human Rights Violation, by Renate Klein, Dr. Renate Klein, who has been with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, for having me, and thank you for your care and concerns for women that you have also expressed for years and years.
And now we have to take one quick final break before I return with some fighting words.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, it's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Talk radio with a brain.
Welcome back to Some Fighting Words. Well, brace yourself and get comfortable. This may take me a while. Last week's Fighting Words was part one of an ongoing meditation I'm calling Women's Suffrages, plural. I tried, albeit superficially, to show that the movement that fought for women's suffrage over a 100-year span, finally winning the vote for some women in 1920, took place in a context and country where, originally, only white, Christian, property-owning, land-holding males possessed the franchise, and they were not particularly eager to share it with anybody who did not meet all those identifying qualifications. The ignorance we have all, male and female, people of color and white people, been infected with is poisonous, but lancing and draining it will also hurt, because that requires an honesty to which we apparently as yet can only aspire. Honesty means I have to start this week with 2 corrections. Last week I ended with a quote from Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, who said she wore white to the State of the Union speech in honor of Alice Paul, the suffragist who led the movement in its later days, but also carried a kente cloth purse in honor of Ida B. Wells, who was excluded from it. As usual when grappling with the knots of racism and sexism, the statement is true, but not the whole truth. That great suffrage parade on the eve of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration did perpetuate racism in that black suffragists were actually asked to march together and, honest to God, at the back of the parade. Some historians differ on why this odious request was made. Was it because during quarrels among the organizers about this, the winners were women of the afraid of alienating Southern legislators school, or those who were unabashedly racist, or those who just didn't want to rock the boat? Some black women chose to march with their sorority sisters at the back, or towards the middle of the march, wherever but together. Wells, already known as a pioneering journalist and anti-lynching crusader, had inspired the beginnings of the National Association of Colored Women in 1896 and also established the Alpha Suffrage Club, with the largest black women's suffrage organization in Illinois. So, no exclusion for her. In 1913, she defiantly marched with white suffragists in the National American Women's Suffrage Association's Washington, D.C. procession. 2. Second correction. In discussing the formerly enslaved abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass, I touched last week on his pact with Susan B. Anthony that both leaders would insist enfranchisement for black women and black men and white women all come in together, not selling out one constituency for the other. Yet Douglass nevertheless gave his blessing to the 15th Amendment so that black men had the vote before black women or white women. There were rancid ironies in Douglass's friendships with Anthony and Stanton, conflicting with his use and abuse of women in his private life. That's not a pretty picture. From the treatment of Anna Murray, the free black woman who helped him escape from slavery, married him, bore him children, and was left at home while he traveled the country and the world. Lionized by white suffragists, male as well as female, he made speeches, he became famous, wrote books, and changed the story of his escape to better fit his own heroism. Anna did not suffer gladly his taking as lovers a trail of white women activists who funded him, helped him establish his newspaper, paid off his mortgage, hid him during the John Brown controversy, and even moved into Anna Douglas's home at his invitation. It was always being rumored that Anna would divorce him, and he didn't mince words regarding her either. Quote, "I am married to an old black log," close quote, Douglas wrote in an 1862 letter. When Anna died, one of the white women who had been at Douglas's side for 30 years, Ottilie Assing, was given to believe she would become his wife, but when he married Helen Pitts, a much younger white woman, Assing killed herself. Not, as I mistakenly wrote last week, another of his protectors and funders, Julia Griffiths. By the way, his sole defender over this marriage to Pitts, a white woman, so it shocked the abolition and suffrage communities both, his sole defender was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who undeniably made racist comments in another context, but who is not easily dismissed by facile critics. For those interested, I recommend Women in the World of Frederick Douglass by Lee Fott, and the scrupulously researched, factually solid work of historical fiction, Douglass's Women by Jewel Parker Rhodes. Without doubling back on last week too much, it's all the more important to get our facts not just straight, but to get them at all, especially during a period where politicians blithely wear blackface and voter registration for people of color is approaching levels of intimidation and harassment reminiscent of the 1940s and 50s. So when I urge my European American sisters that we have to educate ourselves since the patriarchy has deliberately refused to, I mean that for our own enrichment, selfishly, we need to become acquainted with the contributions of black suffragists like Marianne Shadd Carey and Anna Julia Cooper and Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin and later Mary Church Terrell, and so many more. We need to learn that the great Harriet Tubman, called Moses because she led so many enslaved people to safety, Tubman, who was a Union spy and the first African-American woman to serve in the U.S. military, was not only an abolitionist as we know her, but a prominent activist for women's suffrage. Nor did she let being a disabled woman stop her. We need to heal our historical illiteracy, and this is true not only with regard to black Americans. Other Americans of color get swept away in the chiaroscuro of black-white conflict. Have you ever heard of Mabel Ping Hua Lee? She was born in Guangzhou, China in 1896, came with her family to New York in 1905, and by the time she was 16 was a well-known figure, an activist in the suffrage movement. Lee, riding on horseback, led the 1913 suffrage parade in Washington. Her 1914 essay, The Meaning of Woman's Suffrage, named the extension of democracy as a hallmark of feminism, and her speech, The Submerged Half, urged the Chinese community to promote girls' education and women's civic participation. It was covered in the New York Times. Mabel Lee fought for and witnessed the passage of the 19th Amendment, although she herself could not benefit from it, because the Federal Chinese Exclusion Act, in place since 1882, would not be lifted until 1943 with the Magnuson Act. Did you know that Texas, which held the greatest concentration of Latinx peoples, by 1923 had codified all-white primaries for the Democratic Party, meaning non-whites couldn't participate in the party's primaries, which effectively decided the general election's outcomes because of the Democratic Party's dominance? It wasn't until 1954 that the Warren Court unanimously ruled the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause went beyond simply black and white citizens to include other ethnicities and nationalities of origin. Did you know that the suffrage activist Matilda Jocelyn Gage and her germinal work of 1893, Woman, Church, and State, declared that her model for a just society was that of the Haudenosaunee native matrilineal and matrifocal society. The Haudenosaunee, a coalition denoting the 5 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, later joined by the Tuscarora. Gage wrote, "Under their women, the science of government reached the highest form known to the world." In some parts of this country, their country, Native Americans cannot vote to this day. Did you know? Saturated with this research as I am right now, and angry all over again at how women blame each other rather than blaming where the power is that set them against each other, it's hard to refocus on what my point was. So much pain fills the room, so much ignorance, so much of what we used to call horizontal hostility. Women are just people, and different, and make different choices. Some of the suffragist and women's rights activist women of color, like Anna Julia Cooper, chose to put their main energy into the struggle against racism, but they were also suffragists. Others, like St. Pierre Ruffin, insisted on balancing both, co-founding the American Woman Suffrage Association and being vice president of the National Association of Colored Women. The great Shirley Chisholm said in a 1972 interview, quote, "Being black is definitely a handicap in the United States because racism has been very inherent in our institutions." Then she added of her own experience, quote, "I have certainly met much more discrimination in terms of being a woman than being black." Period. Close quote. Have we forgotten a woman's right to choose? White suffragists obviously did not have this particular problem of conflicting priorities. Most of them already activists for years in the abolition movement, they perhaps assumed, naively and conveniently, that they were not racists. The late 18th and early 19th centuries in this country were hardly times of nuance over racism because those involved in that struggle were still trying to break free from the hideous reality and then soul-debilitating aftermath of slavery. And sexism? Misogyny penetrating all aspects of society the way we begin to comprehend it does today? Such awareness barely existed, and many suffragists actually thought the vote would cure society's ills. Only some of the suffrage leaders glimpsed the pervasiveness of sexism, and in her Seneca Falls speech, Stanton named the rights to education, employment, divorce, and freedom of movement. And, most daringly, she named religion as one of the primary oppressors of women, for which she was attacked from almost all quarters. My God, these were just people, though we see them now as historical figures and we want them glorified and perfect. But everybody was just trying to do the best she could. Yes, the white women, of course, had more privilege, though nowhere near the privilege of white men. And yes, those women were trying to learn how to exercise that privilege, for good, as in their abolition and suffrage struggles, and sometimes it came out in a form they had been taught, for ill, in their racism. But black men had more privilege than black women, and black women had more privilege than Mexican women or Chinese women who had a different language. As long as we continue to rank and compare human suffering, we will either die of losing or die of boredom. Surely today our job is to try and scrape off as much rusty, rotted accusation, cross-accusation, defensiveness, and most of all, wasted time, and get to work. Part 3 of this meditation will finish next week. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag fighting words. And that's our show for today. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheRobinMorgan and on Facebook at facebook.com/TheRobinMorgan. Check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book, Dark Matter, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for our show. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.